average hockey game, this is at elite level, so international statistics. On average, you guys run about 5.6 miles per game, which equates to around 9K. Okay, so I put that in context of a Premier League footballer, and they run anywhere between 11 and 12K. But obviously, they play for 20 more minutes than you guys. So in actual fact, percentages state that you run further than elite level footballers in hockey. So your fitness needs to be pretty good to play this sport, all right? And I'm going to talk through some heart rate work a bit later when I get into some running stuff. But to give an example, your heart rate is always going to be above 75% when you're playing hockey for 90% of the time you're playing. So that's very little rest throughout. Okay, so we need to understand that setting up a fitness program whilst we're training, making sure that our heart rate doesn't really dip below that, because that will then carry over to your sport a lot further. So I'll talk through some heart rate stuff later. And then another example is in hockey, you on average are sprinting anywhere between 20 and 60 times a game. Now a sprint is considered anywhere between 10 and 30 meters. So to put that in context, you're probably, while you're on the pitch, doing a full out sprint just over every minute. So how can we incorporate that into your training program as well? And also the distance. So you're only ever sprinting for around 30 meters. So that's a big part of how we can incorporate that into your training, knowing that you're not doing 100-meter sprints, 200-meter sprints. Check, I'm back with it now.
Yeah, carry on. Sorry, I think someone was unmuted.
And then the last little data point we need to look at in terms of improving your fitness is how many minutes you actually play for. So although your match is 70 minutes long, on average, each player plays for around 45 minutes with your roll-on, roll-off subs. Now, due to the fact you have your roll-on, roll-off subs, the intensity of your game is a lot higher than most team sports because there's not as much stoppages, okay? But that does mean you can get a good rest on the sideline. So also, how can we look at that in terms of your pre-season, your training program, and then start looking at, so we know we need to be running for 45 minutes on average per game with rest intervals. We know you're going to be covering about 5.6 miles per game within those 45 minutes. So that's quite a lot of running, all right? And we know you're going to be sprinting on average probably about 40 times per game between 10 and 30 meters. So how can we incorporate that into a training program as well? So there's a lot of variables that you may have never even thought about what actually goes into a game of hockey there, all right? You might just turn up and go, right, and let's play, okay? But when you actually break it down and consider how much running is involved, that is a lot, okay, in each game. So we need to, like I say, talk about how we can get you better at moving for those periods of time and faster. Now, try and have an open conversation throughout with Germ, because he was going to know a little bit more. So if I ask you any questions, Germ, I'm sure you'll know how to answer me. So in pre-season, just give me an example of the fitness tests you would normally do.
I think because the coach is on here, Manjeet, I'm not unmute him because he's probably a better person to answer this question.
Perfect.
And also Pav's on here, he might be able to help as well. And actually the first team captain, Bob's on here. I'll unmute him. So,
In pre-season, what is the fitness, anyone can answer, the fitness test you normally go for? Is it a bleep test? Is it the yo-yo test? Or do you not have a specific running test?
So, John Majid
Manjeet, we can't hear you properly. He's not on mute.
No, not on mute.
It's just a bit muffled.
Can you hear me now?
Not really.
Not to worry. We'll move it on. Basically, what I'm trying to get at is the point that we, as a club, I would recommend you have a standardized test, basically, for pre-season running. As we've determined straight away, running is your fundamental movement in hockey, not swimming or anything like that. So we need to have a standardized test I would use at the start of pre-season and at the end of pre-season. So if the coach is on it, maybe you need to look at a test.
So can you hear me now, John?
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Just quickly, because I'm conscious of the time.
Yeah.
So in the past, we have been doing bleep tests at the start of the season, and then maybe in 6 or 8 weeks' time in the middle of the season, and so on.
Okay.
And lately, we've been doing the 1 mile test. So trying to run 1 mile in less than 6 minutes, but not a constant mile. Break it down in either 200-meter sections or 400-meter sections, and so on, just to build the endurance and things like that. We've been doing some sprint tests, just like a 30-meter dash, 20-meter dash, and so on.
Yeah.
So we have been doing several of these from time to time.
Yeah.
But I think based on your facts, we're more or less doing what um, needs to be done in terms of short work, but with less rest and so on. But I suppose with these facts that you've got, we can maybe try and focus more of the sessions, of the fitness sessions, on these tests. And in terms of distance, I mean sprinting distance, we kind of do about in a session. We'd probably do about a mile of distance, or 1600 meters of sprint work, varied between 20 meters to even 100 meters, just to build up that strength and so on. So we've been doing various stuffs, but I think we probably just need to tweak it a little bit more based on what you've already told us, and what you're going to tell us in the next 15-20 minutes.
Yeah. Fantastic. So sounds like you're already well underway with that, which is great. Now, what I'm just going to mention on the fitness testing side of things is that it'd be good as a club and as a player to always have some data each start of the season, so you can kind of reflect on were you better last season, and have you made improvements. Now, say for example you've used the bleep test, which is fine. The bleep test is a really good test for seeing how you can keep getting faster. So it doesn't always play into the hands of someone who's got a really good aerobic base but can't actually run that fast. And it certainly doesn't ever play into the hands of maybe a player who's an explosive player, who is more sprint work and potentially not running as far. So it's a good standardized test. But personally, if I was to use a test for hockey, I would probably go with a 12-meter Cooper run. So it's a shorter test, and you're going to see how far you can travel in 12 meters. So you would try and do this on a pitch you could measure out, and you'd measure out how far you can run in 12 minutes, okay? Chances are in hockey, you're never going to be running for more than 12 minutes at once, because there will be some stoppages, all right? But the difference is with the bleep test, obviously the speed isn't going to change. So it's a universal test for everyone in that sense, all right? You could also look at doing a 20-minute run test, or even like I've just tested Germ on a 5K, okay, which most of your players will probably be sub 20 if they're good runners. So at least then you can have something to start pre-season and finish. If you want to stick with the bleep test, by all means, that's cool. But at least just have some standardized numbers at the start, and then at the end of pre-season would be great. In terms of middle of season training, for anyone who's thinking, I'm going to get into middle of season training, but I wouldn't do any fitness testing if you don't need to in the middle of season, unless someone's come back from injury, all right? Because if someone's come back from injury and you're trying to see how fit they are, then you compare their scores at the start of the season, if that makes sense, all right? Now, what I want to try and talk you through is how I would start looking at your pre-season, okay? Because I'm conscious of time. We're nearly 20 minutes in already and I haven't got onto that. So I want to talk about four main components of your pre-season training, or just look at this as in a general fitness for hockey or in fitness in general. And the number one priority needs to be injury prevention. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how fit you are. If you can't stay on the pitch, it doesn't matter whatsoever, okay? So you need to be healthy as possible so you can play all season. Now, what that means is understanding what the most common injuries are in hockey. Now, the most common injuries in hockey are ankle sprains and ACL tears, okay? So rolling an ankle or wrecking a knee, basically. So we need to put into your training program strength work to strengthen the joint of the knee and the ankle to make sure you're not getting hurt throughout. And they would fall in the form of doing some weighted exercise and also some plyometric landing and jumping work. So those are the two major issues I would make sure you're definitely figuring out first. Are you getting many ankle injuries over the season? Are you getting any ACL tears over the season? Are you getting any quad tears, calf, hamstring? And if there's a trend growing that you are getting similar injuries throughout the season, that would definitely highlight something that you're probably missing out in your strength work. Or if you aren't doing any injury prehab type stuff each and every session, definitely something you need to consider. So first and foremost is how strong can you get so you don't get injured, okay? And that doesn't mean doing loads and loads of weights. That can be as simple as making sure you can decelerate and turn without any pain throughout the whole game. Because chances are, the further the game goes on, the more risk of injury you are, okay? So can we make sure we're strong at the start of the game and still strong at the end of the game? The next thing you want to work on is your aerobic base, which we spoke about on the running. And like we've said, we get standardized tests for that, whether it's the beat test, 12-minute Cooper run test, 20-minute test. That's down to you, but you have a standardized test for that. We then look at game-specific skills, which is then looking at your coaching and your coordination, your ball handling skills, passing, dribbling and whatnot. And then finally, we're going to look at maximum effort work, which would be sprinting, agility, and like I say, full effort work. So at the start of your pre-season, when we're talking injury and prehab stuff, like I've said, let's figure out, are there any common injuries that are occurring across the club? And if they are, you need to then liaise with the physio and with potentially someone like myself or in the hockey field that could come up with a strength and conditioning plan for the team, okay? And what I would do is I would implement that in every training session at the start, have a good, correct warm-up protocol, and then also any gym work that you're not doing away from hockey, okay? You would also, I'd recommend getting a mobility routine going. So if it's common for all your players to have tight hamstrings, tight lower backs, tight glutes, which is probably going to be common being bent over playing hockey, I'd start thinking about the mobility routines that you're doing daily. If you could get them going, would be fantastic as well. So that is also something to consider if you're not got a stretching routine going. So once you've outlined if there's any injury prevention stuff that you've missed out, you then want to start moving on to this aerobic base work, okay? Now the aerobic base work for your pre-season is, I'm going to pretend your pre-season's 12 weeks long. I don't know how long normally you go, but 12 weeks is a good time frame. So weeks 1 to 4 would be predominantly low aerobic work, okay? If you tend to do a lot of high intensity stuff in the first few weeks of pre-season, by the time you start the season, you've probably lost that benefit, okay? When it comes to fitness, imagine fitness on a continuum, okay? And maximum output is at one end, and then doing like marathon type running is at the other end. The marathon type base fitness level decreases the slowest, okay? So if you can get every single player's or your individuals, your ability to run long distance well, that will deteriorate the slowest throughout the season, okay? If you concentrate at the start of pre-season only on the high intensity stuff, that wears out the quickest, and it also wears out the players the quickest, okay? So you want to concentrate on working on longer, slow work at the start of pre-season, if that makes sense, okay? You also want to start at the start of pre-season making sure that all the skill work you're doing is at low intensity as well, okay? So making sure your practice is considered perfect practice. There is no point getting players back into pre-season early and you're just going to hammer them with loads of shuttle runs and then expect them to have good ball handling skills, okay? You want to make sure that your practice is under low fatigue, if that makes sense. Moving past weeks 1 and 4, so for example, you are training 3 or 4 times a week and you're doing slower, longer runs and you're concentrating a lot on your skill work, you would then move into week 5 after your 4-week baseline. And you would have tested your aerobic fitness on week 1, which we spoke about was your bleep test, for example. and we're going to test that at the end. So just make sure your score is ready. Weeks 5 to 8, so your middle 4 weeks, we're going to increase the intensity of your running. So for example, in the first 4 weeks, if we've been doing slower, longer runs from anywhere between 45 minutes to an hour at a lower heart rate, you're now going to increase the intensity of those runs using rest intervals. So it might be 400-meter runs, minute recovery, something like that, or 800-meter runs with 2-minute recovery. And you're then going to start looking at, can we do some skill work under fatigue, okay? So it might mean you are going to do some sprint work and then try and do ball handling skills. Do some sprint work, then try and do ball handling skills or positional work, okay? So as you can see, we're moving from this slower effort, slowly increasing into this moderately to high effort. And then the last 4 weeks of this pre-season are going to predominantly concentrate on being as explosive and as ready as you are to start the season, okay? So you would then go into very, very high intensity work and then very high intensity skill work. Now, the whole point is you might have a player in training who has fantastic ability, but you get him 60 minutes into the match and he's no good, all right? So hopefully, with low skill work, leading into week 12, that player should now have the aerobic base and the high intensity base ready to use his skills later on in the game, okay, where most games are going to be won. Now, on week 12, you would then retest your bleed test or whatever, and we would definitely see an improvement unless you've been slacking off. Now, that's just a continuum of how you should plan your pre-season from an intensity perspective. So you start slow, build, okay? When you start the season, you then want to imagine that each game is your high intensity, okay? So in training, unless you've got players who are not pulling the weight and not fit enough, you want to try and stay off high intensity work midweek and treating game time as maximum intensity. So in the week, prehab, rehab, strength work, and some light aerobic work is the best way to go about it, all right? There's no point causing excess stress 2 or 3 days after a game, which isn't going to carry over anyway, because in pre-season, as we've determined, the low intensity fitness should take you through the season, and the match game time will act as your high intensity. Now, I've gone through a lot there, and you're probably thinking, what the heck's he going on about? So it might be time for a few questions on any of that before I go into a little bit more detail on how to plan your running sessions a little bit more in those pre-season.
All right, I'm going to unmute everyone, so if anyone's got any questions. But maybe I can kick it off, John. If, say, you're not getting enough minutes on the weekend,
yeah,
and so then you're not doing your, like you said, high intensity work, how would you then work in the week?
Yeah, so post game, say we've said an average player hits 45 minutes. If you haven't hit that intensity post game, I'd recommend doing intervals on that day. All right, so it's going to be crap, okay? But if you've been a sub for quite a lot of the game and you want to retain your fitness over the week, do some high intensity interval training after the game finishes on the pitch. All right. If you ever go to a professional football match, you will see all the subs who haven't played after the game hitting intervals really hard. Okay, because they then will have the next day off and back off with the rest of the team. All right. So that's how you're going to keep your level of fitness. If that's not possible, you're all in the changing rooms and you've already all gone for a beer, I would then try and make sure as early in the week as you can, hit some high intensity running work and then get back in with the team for training. I don't know if you train Thursday night or something like that. So you can still get your skill work and your aerobic work done. Does that make sense, Graham?
Yeah. And I think, has anyone else got a question, by the way? Don't know, one asked Manjeet or Bob or anyone?
No, not really. Nothing from me for the moment.
Yeah, I've got one. Just in terms of when you say about the pre-season and the 3 different phases.
Yeah.
Throughout it, how would you go about integrating your weaknesses into that pre-season? For example, you spoke about in the last phase you'd train explosiveness, but say that's a weak point. would you integrate that earlier into the whole training program, or would you increase the volume during that phase?
When you say explosiveness, you're talking being able to run faster, change direction quicker?
Yeah, like from standing still to like your first 5 yards.
So acceleration work.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would come later on in the program. Yeah. So max effort acceleration work you want to do when your baseline fitness is already high. Okay, you're at highest risk of injury when doing maximum intensity work. So you would incorporate that at the tail end. Call it the sharpening end of the pre-season. All right. If you are too slow and not quick enough, chances are you just doing sprints over and over again probably won't get you any quicker. All right. You'll need to start hitting some weights in the gym. All right. Moving some weight at some intensity, whether that's if you've got resistance bands, you could sprint against, if you've got sleds at the club, if you've got, you've seen parachute type running, anything where you can start moving a smaller load explosively is going to get you a little bit quicker than just doing short runs, for example.
Right. Okay. But say if it was something you specifically wanted to improve on, say that if that was your weakness of it, would you just increase the volume during that one phase, or would you elongate it, for example? I understand like how you would go about it, but say if you want to work on that specifically more than anything else, say for example your baseline fitness is already at a decent level, but that's not so much. Would you increase the volume, or would you start it earlier?
By all means, if you already fit enough to tolerate it, incorporate that on a non-training day, then yeah, go for it. And like you say, linear progression of increasing the volume will help. So maybe do 3 weeks and then back off for a week, and then another 3 weeks and then back off for a week. For example, on week 1, you might have 20 efforts of a 10-yard dash. And then week 2, you might go to 25 efforts. And then week 3, you might go to 30 efforts. Okay. Week 4, you would then back off a little bit. And then you would then increase the volume again. All right. Or you increase the distance you're running for, or you could add load for the distance that you are running for. So by week 12, for example, you might be hitting 60 bouts of a 10-yard dash at maximum intensity.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
John, the lads train normally Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Yeah.
What would you say would be
Play on Saturday or Sunday?
It can be either, but it's mainly Sundays. But some of the ladies, the seconds, thirds, fourths, mainly play on Saturdays, and the first team men's play on Sundays mainly. Yeah.
So if you're back in training on Monday,
Tuesday and Thursday.
Tuesday, sorry, yeah. Definitely a lighter session, no high intensity work, especially if they've had a lot of minutes. Players who haven't had so much minutes, maybe you can make them doing some extra intervals. But I would, personally, the priority would be some skill work, tactical work. And then if you feel you need to sharpen the team up a little bit, hit that on a Thursday, ready for the Sunday.
Okay. So there wouldn't be an issue of fatigue from the Thursday going into the Sunday?
If you kept the intensity high but the volume low, there shouldn't be any carryover. So I'm not suggesting you just make them do doggies for 2 hours, but some high intensity work for less than 10 or 15 minutes. If that's what you want to do, then that should be fine. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Any other questions before we carry on?
Yeah. There's kind of like one just about me, but when I do running, so when I do 5K, my pace will be half an hour as a total, even though each kilometre is quite irregular. But when I do 10K, the pace is an hour, so it says that I'm averaging at the same pace no matter what the distance is. And that's been my pace for like 3 years now. So I don't know how to speed up the pace if I'm doing a shorter distance.
Okay, good question, but it's going to totally tie in exactly what I'm about to discuss next. So hopefully your answer will be, you've jumped the gun on what I was going to talk about. So hopefully I answer your question the next little bit, which will be great. All right.
Cool.
So I'm just going to talk about how to incorporate different running speeds in your running, as the question just asked. So Germ spoke about at the start how we can target different running zones in order to improve our fitness and our running speed. So, what was your name? Sorry, you just asked that question. I didn't say. Kieran. So, Kieran, for example, so Kieran's running 5K, everybody, and that's taken her 30 minutes. So, who's good at maths? Should only be 6 minutes per K, correct? All right. So, if Kieran's running 6 minutes per kilometer, she can run that for half an hour, but she can also hold that pace for an hour, which outside looking in would suggest, why don't you just start running a little bit faster for the 30 minutes? Surely you can. All right. Maybe that is an option, but maybe now we can start incorporating that into a training program. So if we know Kieran can run at a certain pace for a certain time, we can now break that down into intervals. And like I said at the start of pre-season, if you have your 12-minute Cooper time, all right, you will have a distance there, and then you could divide that distance by time. So you will know exactly how far you were traveling in a certain amount of time, whether that's a minute, whether that's 2 minutes. We know Kieran is traveling 1 kilometer in 6 minutes. To get Kieran moving faster, we know she's got to travel more than 1 kilometer in 6 minutes to bring her 5K down. Okay, it's as simple as that. So how we would incorporate that is, you've got 3 ways of incorporating running training, all right? And you might want to write this down. The first way is what we call aerobic running, and that would be in what we consider zone 2 heart rate. That's the low intensity run, and that's where we would start our pre-season at, okay? Imagine the person who can run for an hour, all right, and can keep his heart rate the lowest and run the furthest. He's naturally going to be the fittest on the team, or she, okay? So if a person can run at a low heart rate, the furthest distance in an hour, they will be your fittest runner at the club, okay? Now, so for example, we'll take Kieran's 10K time, which is 60 minutes, and we know Kieran can complete that 1 kilometer every 6 minutes. So we would break that down, and then we'd start making her run a little bit faster. So that might look anywhere like 3 minutes at above the pace she can run. So we're looking at maybe a 5-minute kilometer for 3 minutes. And then she would then back off, for example, for 2 minutes. And that might be a slower pace than she can normally cover. So it might be a 7-minute per kilometer. So that interval there would look like 3 minutes at a 5-minute per kilometer, and then a 2-minute back off pace at 7-minute per kilometer. So we're working a minute either end of that. We then increase those duration, the amount of intervals she's doing each week potentially, or we'd increase the time she's running for or the speed she's running for. So a dead easy way on week 1 is how I started off with Germ, was you did a 10-minute warm-up, dead easy, okay? So at zone 2 for Kieran, that would probably look about 7 minute per kilometer pace, okay? So she'd warm up for 10 minutes. Then week 1 on the program was 2 minutes at running at a high intensity, and then 2 minutes running at a low intensity. And we would do that for 6 sets. So we're doing what we call a threshold session now. So Kieran would run potentially at a 5-minute per kilometer pace, and then for 2 minutes, and then she'd back off for 2 minutes at a 7-minute kilometer pace. And we'd start off with 6 bouts. So Kieran there is going to accumulate 24 minutes worth of running. 2 minutes on, 2 minutes off, times 6 equals 24. But within that 24 minutes, she's only actually running 12 minutes at a fast pace and 12 minutes at a slow pace. Now, we want to try and improve Kieran's 5K time of half an hour. So we've got to get Kieran running half an hour's worth or close to of pace faster than her current time, if that makes sense. So the next week's intervals may go up to 3 minutes and so on until she's getting close to 30 minutes worth of running at pace, which would be a 5-minute per kilometer pace to bring her 5K down. So to not confuse you, because you've probably lost the thread a little bit there, basically you're going to run a hard interval and then run an easy interval, and you're going to increase the volume of intervals or the volume of time you're running at those intervals over the weeks. Okay, if you jump on that blog that I spoke about earlier that I've written, there's 6 weeks of workouts on there that Germ's just followed, and there is a breakdown on every single one how to complete that workout. All right, so it's dead simple in terms of trying to improve your 5K. It's just a little bit of maths. Okay. So the 3 zones that I spoke about are your aerobic zone, your threshold, your aerobic zone, your tempo, and your threshold. So in pre-season, that would kind of correlate across your 12 weeks. So your first 4 weeks would be a lot of aerobic running. The middle zone would be a lot of tempo running, which is at a faster pace. And then the last 4 weeks would be a lot of threshold running, okay, which is near maximum effort for sustained periods with rest periods. Incorporating those 3 types of training across your pre-season is going to give you the best bang for your buck, other than just doing interval training all the way through, which is a lot of what happens in pre-season. You'll start off with some longer runs, and then you just end up hitting intervals after intervals after intervals. But the problem is you're not figuring out how far you're running or how long you're running for, okay, which will pay off massively, knowing that you've got to run for 45 minutes on average in a game. If one of your players can't run for 45 minutes at a sustained pace at the start of pre-season, he's got no chance of, or she's got no chance of finishing a game at anywhere near intensity. So the minimum standard of running would need to be 45 minutes continuous. Did that make any sense, Kieran, or did it just sound like waffle?
Yeah, thank you.
I think what I'll do, John, is the blog that you wrote, I'll send it out to everybody, and then that you put a calculator on there as well, didn't you?
Yeah.
So you can work out your zones, and you also based on your average pace.
Yeah. Any more questions on how to get a bit better at running without trying to confuse you too much? Because I understand it is a bit of a, once you understand it, it's dead easy subject, but you've probably just heard zones and aerobic and tempo and threshold and all these random words you've never heard before. So is there any other questions on running that maybe I could break it down a little bit easier for you?
I've got one. I don't know whether it's your area, but my when I sprint, it is very slow. Is there any way, I don't know whether it's the way I run, which I have been told that it's not, I don't run very well, but is there a way that I can improve my sprint speed?
Yes, definitely. First, how far are we sprinting?
10, 20 meters.
Okay, so it's more like acceleration work if it's that short a distance. So you're not probably getting up to top speed, but it's kind of changing direction, would you say, is what's slow? What is your issue?
Yeah, it's getting,
Off the mark.
off the mark. It's very slow.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Like the question I had earlier about the explosiveness, you would start doing some intervals, but using resistance. So, for example, if I'm going to sprint 10 meters and I'm just going to keep sprinting 10 meters over and over again, chances are I'm going to get the same result over and over again after a few weeks. Okay. So how can I increase the load across those 10 meters? For example, you could run with a resistance band around your waist, and I could add some resistance. We do that for a few weeks, take the resistance band away. Your muscles have been put under a little bit more stress, even though we've been covering the same distance. Hopefully we would see some results. Now, depending on your training age, how long you've been training for, this would differ. So if I've got someone who's brand new to sprinting, I'm going to see results a lot quicker. If I've got someone who's been doing this a long time, chances are it's going to be harder for you to make much gain. Okay, so if you've never done any sprint training before, you will make results much faster than someone who's done a lot of sprint training. And the answer to your question is add resistance to your training or add some in the gym, or both.
Thank you.
Anyone else got a question about running?
So it's not really a question. It's more of an observation, John, about how you said we should like stagger and build up to the games on the weekend. Because I've always been of the mentality that you give it your all during the week, and how you train is then how you're then going to go out and play on the weekend. And if you don't give it your all during training, then you won't be able to give it your all during a game. I suppose that's a very old-fashioned way of thinking, but it's changing that mindset and mentality, and then being able to just switch on during game time and be able to put them blasts in that you've been building up to rather than depleting throughout the week.
Yeah, good question. That is the whole point of pre-season. So pre-season, you should finish at peak, okay? And then you're trying to maintain as close to peak as you can throughout season. So the analogy I'd like to use, imagine if you're at the top of the hill, all right, and you come down the hill a little bit, which, so to speak, might be 10 weeks into training. Providing you can stay near the top of the hill, so around 90%, it's a lot easier for you to get back to that top of the hill. Now, if your 100% drops to 50%, okay, you then need to start increasing the work you're doing. But if you can stay sharp with 10, 15, 20 minutes max of some interval work in training, providing your pre-season was good enough and you're getting plenty of game time, you don't need to be killing yourself in training is the answer. Because basically you should leave your maximum efforts for a game and a competition, and training should always be around 70, 80%, unless your baseline fitness isn't high enough yet anyway.
So I guess, how would you continue to test for fitness during the season then? Would it be how they're getting on during the game?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot easier at professional level. Obviously, you have a lot of trackers, so it's hard to say, oh, so and so only ran 4K when I know they should have ran 6K this game. All right, so it is down to each individual to kind of monitor in themselves. Do they feel they're fit enough? And that might just come in a form of maybe a questionnaire, or even just discussing that with your players. So you could say every 6 weeks to the team, they're probably not going to want to do any fitness, but be as open as communicating as possible of, do you feel fit enough to compete? And at the end of the day, if the results are, as a coach, if the results are showing that you're losing games in the last 10, 15 minutes quite often, or I don't know, you're getting injured often, chances are your fitness and your prehab stuff just isn't working right. If you're losing games in the first half, chances are it's not the fitness that is the issue, all right? If you're continually losing games towards the end of the game, and then maybe fitness is the issue.
Yeah, I think one of the observations the guys had at the annual general meeting last week that we had was that I think the first team in particular always tend to start slowly, and whether that is a pre-season issue, but they always kind of end up being up there as a top 2-3 fittest teams in the league. Well, they have done for the last 2-3 seasons at least. So I guess the worry is that if they turn it off a little bit during the season, are they all going to be fit enough during the games? But like you said, it's about what you do in pre-season, isn't it?
Yeah, massively. And how many games is in a hockey season?
About 18 league games, but we may have some practice games as well. So I would say about 25 games in a whole season.
So, and are those on always consecutive weekends, never a weekend off?
There may be a 1 weekend off during. Well, there's two parts of the season. There's the pre-Christmas season, and then there's almost a 4-week break, and then a second half of the season. But in the first half of the season, you may have a week off because of some junior performance games and so on. But other than that, it's like a continuous 9-week kind of set, if you like.
That's fantastic, having a 4-week break at Christmas, because that is the perfect time then to probably back off for a week and then have another 3-week build phase ready to go again. So I would 100% use that break as an in-season pre-season, so to speak. All right. So
yes, I think our biggest problem, having been with the club for such a long time, whenever we've had a good pre-season, we've always done well in the whole of the season. And whenever or players who've used the halfway break, the 4 weeks, have used that in sensibly by doing some work, either gym work or light weights or just some sprint work and things like that, they come back running into the season. But our biggest problem is pre-season, definitely. I mean, a long time ago, we used to do pre-season at Leaky Hills and things like that, and exactly using the sort of program that you've been professing, the 12-week, where the first 3-4 weeks would be hill sessions, weight sessions, hill sessions and things like that, and then coming on to the sprint work and the turning, the agility, the shuttle work and so on. And players who did that religiously always did well in the season.
Yeah, Yeah. It's the biggest thing from a club perspective. I've played football for a long time. Is how early you can settle the squad in a pre-season is massive. So if you end up signing players towards the end of pre-season, that obviously has a big difference on the team. But if you can get, like you say, everyone together as early as possible, doing that longer aerobic type work, that hill sprint work you mentioned, you'd be better off doing that later in the program. Although you probably, the old school mentality of pre-season is like, and let's get everyone back and try and beast them as early as we can. That was always the case in football for me. The manager would try and make you sick first week back. But the idea is if we can gradually build across those 12 weeks and finish with the really high intensity work, when you come to game time on week 1, the theory should be that your players will be in far better shape than if you've done the hill sprints on week 1, and then week 12 you may have lost the benefit you got from those hill sprints. So I've spoken a lot there. We've had some good questions, but is there any other questions I can help anyone with? Anything specific with regard to fire away?
I think, John, the one area that I think as a club we need to work on is agility, because now the sport has become a very kind of athleticism focused sort of sport, especially at the high level.
Yeah.
So I think it's the agility aspect of the game, the lots of turning, low turning, low running, low sprinting, and so on. Different ranges of movements. So that's one area of concern for the whole club. I don't think as a club we're as athletic or as agile as some of the top clubs. And the second thing is what you were saying earlier regarding injuries. I mean, we don't have too many kind of knee injuries or ankle injuries as such, but it's more hamstring and calf kind of work. Calf strains, hamstring strains, and maybe stiff lower backs and things like that. So I think those are the areas that we need to kind of strengthen as a club.
I mean, with regard to agility training, it's quite a tough one due to the fact that agility generally isn't a trained skill so much as something like long distance running is, because you can always play against someone who reads the game so well, they will have made their mind up where the defender is going before their legs are going there, so to speak. So the example that I want to use is that in baseball, there was a massive study on how the heck does a baseball player actually hit the baseball. His eyes aren't fast enough to see the baseball coming. But what a good baseball hitter will do is build a picture up of where the ball's going to go before it's there. So a good way to train agility is that's basically the change of direction of where you need to be going, is to try and understand movement patterns of the opposition better. So that might be looking at breaking down of, if your opponent is in this position, chances are they're going to change direction in this position. Now that's looking at trying to beat a player or guess which way your opponent's going. In terms of your own training, to say if you literally want to sprint and then change direction quickly, it's reaction time. So you could start by doing whistle blow drills. So everyone's running. As soon as the whistle blows, change direction as quick as you can. But these are under conditions, remember, that there's no opposition. So you also need to be trying maybe put an opponent in the way as well. So agility is quite a hard skill to train in that sense, because, for example, I could just give you running through a cone over and over again. But the problem is you're going to understand the pattern of that cone and you'll automatically get better because the cones are staying in the same place. Okay. What you need to try and do is come up with drills that are random to improve agility, not the same drill of running through that cone. The person the fastest runs through it, they are clearly the most agile. It doesn't actually work like that in a game scenario, because you're reacting to what's going on around you, not just doing the same thing over and over again, if that makes sense. So trying to be imaginative with agility drills is tough, but you need to try and think of things that you can do that will make the player make a decision on the spot, instead of just giving them the same drill over and over again, if that makes sense. In terms of calf and hamstring strain, if there's two things that are going on, it's are they conditioned enough to keep running towards the tail end of the game, or are they simply not strong enough? Okay, if they're not strong enough, you need to get them in the gym and start doing some weighted work, building up some glute and hamstring strength and some calf strength. But that is fairly basic stuff that I could easily pass on if needs be on a protocol to try and keep you healthy throughout the season in terms of hamstring and calf strains. Some work you could do in pre-season if you could get in a gym would be great. But even through pre-season, even in season, a lot of body weight type stuff you could incorporate and some lightweight stuff to keep hamstrings and calves healthy. Wouldn't be too difficult. If that's something that I could help you out with, no problem.
John, like how much in terms of lifting heavy to just lifting weight proportion should a hockey player be doing, or like a football player be doing? And what I'm trying to say is that should they be working to the maximum, like 1 rep max, or what kind of number of reps should they be doing? If that makes sense. Not to get too bulky is what I'm trying to say, but to have the maximum strength and output when it comes to explosive stuff.
Yeah, so with explosive stuff, what you've got to remember is, for example, your max bench press, say, might be 100 kilos, okay? But when you do that max bench press, you've got to think about how slow you're actually moving the bar, all right? Now, when you're playing hockey or any team sport, generally injuries aren't made through slow movement. They're made through explosive movement, all right? So you've got to have a foundation around the joint of that joint being stable, which you would get through slow movement. So, for example, if you were testing the bench press and you did their 1 rep max, then great. But then you've also got to test the bench press under high speed. So it might be maximum reps in 20 seconds at a percentage of that 1 rep max, which would probably be like 40%, okay? So same with the squat, I could test your 1 rep max squat. Someone's got really strong legs, great, but it took them 10 seconds to stand up, okay? How much carryover does that actually have that to hockey when you're getting hamstring strains from sprinting, okay? So then maybe we could look at how much load can we move in a certain amount of time and then test it that way. Does that make sense, Graham?
Yeah, definitely.
So in terms of body weight, just some rough guidelines. Every player probably should be able to squat their body weight, all right? Just as a general rule, that would be about, if you're 80 kilo male, you should be able to back squat 80 kilo. If I was doing a rehab from any knee injury, before I would be doing any sort of even close to sprint work, I would expect that person to be able to perform a box squat, which is where you sit down to a box and stand up with their body weight on their back. Is just a baseline that we would use at the gym. The physio at the gym would be making sure that's happening before they'd even consider doing any sprinting.
Okay. Anyone else got any questions?
Yeah, I've got a question.
All right.
Oh, sorry.
Who's that first? Was that Sukunko? Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah. John, I've got 30 minutes to exercise in the gym. Do I use the bike, the treadmill, or the cross trainer?
What's the goal?
Well, I'm in my 60s, so I tend to play hockey about the same time, but at a much slower pace, obviously. Okay, so it's just my fitness for the hockey game on the weekend, more leisurely pace, obviously.
Yeah, I would. If you're a bit sore from the hockey game, I'd probably lay off the running if you just want to try and keep your fitness ticking over. So the cross trainer and the bike would be a great option. If you're not too sore, throwing in some running is fine. But if it's just general health, making sure you can get through the hockey game, then all three are an option. I would probably go with bike and treadmill over the cross trainer, just the fact the cross trainer is quite an unnatural movement. So biking, treadmill, all good, and make sure you're doing some multi-directional work. So remember, those things are just completely on the spot. So maybe throw in some lateral work as well.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, there was a lot of, one more, just follow up. There was a lot of talk about not running on the treadmill because of old people's knees and things. But then recent research said, actually, it's good to run, even if your knees are a bit dodgy because it rebuilds them and gives you the strength.
So
What's your
anything under load is going to help reduce the breakdown of bones. So anything that you can keep doing under load is great.
Okay.
I mean, if running hurts, then there are obviously other options. But I would always recommend keep doing what you can do for as long as you can do it.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
You have a question?
Yeah, so we always have players that come back either late to pre-season or are, especially after Christmas, they're a bit on the heavy side. Is it the aerobic running that they need to focus on for a longer period of time so they can then work on the more explosive stuff to get weight down first? Because what happens is they just get thrown into the deep end with everybody else. They struggle, we laugh at them, and et cetera, and it becomes more difficult for them to catch up with everyone else.
Yeah, your baseline is always you're going to be along. If you can't run consistent pace for, like we said, 45 minutes, you trying to do interval work, it's going to be pointless to start off with. You've got to be, each player needs to be able to run for the duration of the game, and until they've got that at a good pace, then the interval work's going to be lost on them, because they might get into a game, hit a few shuttle runs, feel great from their interval training. 20 minutes in, they're gonna be panting. All right. And if it is, if they do need to lose some timber after Christmas, definitely doing some aerobic work is gonna burn the most calories for because you can just simply sustain it for longer. All right. If you start doing some sprint stuff, you might only last 10 or 15 minutes. Okay. Yeah, there's going to be a high calorie burn for those 10 minutes. But if I can get someone moving for an hour, they are going to naturally burn more calories at the end of the day.
And John, is there like a baseline that you might suggest that someone who's playing hockey should be able to run at a pace for an hour or 45 minutes, like you said, for a game?
I'm sure there's some data out there that you could easily pull up. All right, I didn't find out what these professionals are getting on a 5K time or 10K time or 12-meter Cooper run, but I'm sure there'll be some data out there. I mean, off the top of my head, knowing how fast you need to keep running for 45 minutes, if you can't hit a 10K in under 45 minutes, then you're definitely not fit enough probably to be playing at the level you want to be playing at.
Okay.
So,
John, I lately I've been kind of focusing more on time-based running as opposed to distance-based running. What I mean is, we used to do a lot of we used to go onto the track and we used to do a lot of do 800 meters and do 400 meters and so on. But last few seasons, what we've been doing is we've been actually doing the time run. So you're running for 4 minutes, or you're running for 6 minutes, or you're running for 3 minutes, and at the end of that 3-4 minutes run, then you're monitoring how much distance you've covered. And I think that has helped quite a few of the players, where they then, after a session, if they've done 20 minutes of running in intervals of 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, and so on, then the collective distance that they've run over that 20 minutes kind of makes it sinks in better, rather than actually just doing 20 laps of 400 meters and things like that. So that seems to sink in better with the players, in the sense that they've done 20 minutes running, and they've only covered 2 miles, and some may have covered 3 miles, and so on.
Yeah, I think that's a much more sensible approach than just doing distance. For example, if you've got a really good runner and you're all running the same distance, he's going to have a much easier session than the person who's not as good as running. But if you're all running for 2 minutes at a certain intensity, everybody's getting the same workout in that sense. Right?
Exactly. That's the mentality behind it.
Yeah. Much better to do than distance. Yeah, that's the exact protocol I use all running, always in time. You can manipulate the intensity a lot better than distance. Yeah, so that's good.
Okay. Have any of the youngsters got any questions? They've all been very quiet. You can private message me if you want, and I can ask John for you if you want me to. No? Okay. Any parents? No?
Sorry, I had one question.
Well, I was just going to say one. Are we going to base the pre-season round, obviously, the suggestions that John said?
Sorry?
Are we going to base the pre-season around, obviously, this sort of the talk that we've had?
It's probably not for me to answer that.
The general question.
Yeah, I think maybe it's a discussion Manjeet and Bob can have. Sorry.
Yeah, Pete. Yeah, definitely. I mean, every season we have a pre-season, and we get a range of players. First teamers, second teamers, third teamers, and I'll let you know of this year's pre-season as well. And then obviously the issue is getting together at one spot, especially if we're doing track sessions. But what we then tend to do is groups of people or players, go to their own track session which is closest to them. Yeah, but I'll let you guys know, and then we can take it from there.
It's just obviously interesting, like obviously what each individual's pace at the start of the pre-season. That's all.
Yeah, I think having a test and a retest, I think, the more I think about it, it's just so important, because then you see where you are and then how much you've improved, and then you can use that as a baseline for the whole season if you need to retest again.
Yeah, especially if you get injured, it's massive, because it's just guesswork otherwise. If you come back from injury and you're able to start playing again, let's retest. Let's see how much percentage we were off at the start of the season or your last test. And then, like you say, you've got that baseline then. And then even into next season, you can say, right, and this is what you hit last season. You can have a bit of motivation to say, right, and I'm going to try and beat that last season. I'm going to get myself a little bit fitter. If it's just guesswork every year, unfortunately, it'll stay guesswork for the rest of the seasons. Okay.
And I think this period has shown us as well that you don't always necessarily have to be together. There might be people living in different areas, but if you're doing an aerobic run for 45 minutes or an hour, you don't always have to do it together. I mean, there's plenty of tracking devices to verify that you've done the work. So I guess there's no excuses.
Start clubs on Strava and all sorts these days. So yeah,
Okay.
coach would know straight away if you haven't done the work or not.
I mean, we have a good kind of test. It's not really a test. It's just a good kind of guide. Most of my sessions, we do a 3-minute pyramid run, and a pyramid on a hockey pitch is about 800 meters, if you like, and we tend to set a target of less than 3 minutes. And then we do the same pyramid run with a stick and ball. So you're now bending over, and it's a little bit more difficult. And then the time is slightly increased. And from that, you can sometimes see that if players are maybe fatigued a little bit, or maybe not in the mood, and so on. And I think that's where Pav was coming from earlier, that every session or every practice session needs to be done at 100%. And that's where he was trying to sort of make that the comment. But we tend to do it's not a tested kind of session, but just a guide to give us an idea of what's going on with players and so on.
Yeah, the big thing with testing in season and in training is generally the mindset won't always be on training, it'll be on the game. Whereas in pre-season, you can solely concentrate on just the fitness work. So you'll tend to have a better baseline score in pre-season because you're not conscious about anything else that's going on. So if you are to test in pre-season and test week by week using this pyramid run, it might change from week to week a lot more, is what I'm suggesting, than it would potentially in pre-season, because there's no game time to worry about.
Okay. Anyone else got a question?
Yes, I had one question.
Hi.
You focused quite a lot on fitness and like speed for overall movement drills, but given that we're exercising at home and some of us don't have access to weights or resistant bands, aside from fitness, what other exercises would you recommend us to do at home to prepare for the season?
As aside from running and whatnot?
Yes.
Yeah, so you can start incorporating a bit of a strength program into just using some body weight. So whether that's some body weight squats, lunges, you could add in resistance using hills. So you could sprint up and down a hill without a resistance band, would be a great way of doing it. And you can do those squats, lunges, jumps at a slow pace, at a high pace. All right, so you're hitting some variables. You could do as far as the major issue you've got is, say for example, I give you a load of burpees and skipping and squats and lunges. It's all great stuff. It's all going to get you a little bit fitter, but the carryover that it will have to your hockey might be limited. All right. The major thing is psychologically that if you are training, chances are you're going to be fitter when you come back to pre-season, even if you haven't been playing any hockey. All right. So if you were to do some circuits at home, that is going to be great, especially for your mindset. But in terms of the movements, you will still need to be doing some running, lunges, and squats to get your best bet for lower body work, and then upper body work, just making sure your core stays strong. And the big thing is the amount of rotational work in hockey, which is not really spoken about as much. So if you can get some rotational work in there as well, fantastic. So whether it's from a side plank position or press ups with a rotation or anything basically that you're working sideways will really help as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? No? Okay. John, is there any final words you want to add?
No, like I said, I've covered a lot, probably confused some of you. But the premise was that your 12-week plan or pre-season, remember, start a bit slower than you normally would and finish as high intensity as you would is basically the premise of what I'm trying to get across. Practice your skill work under no fatigue, so the practice is perfect. And then once you start incorporating the fitness, start practicing your skill work under high fatigue, okay? So you're basically training your pre-season as you would a game. You start off fresh and you finish like death, all right? And that's how your pre-season should kind of go.
Okay, excellent. John, really appreciate your time. It's been really insightful. Already getting a few good comments coming through, so thank you.
All right, guys.
Thank you for that. What I've done, I've recorded this, so I'll send it to you, John, and I'll send it to all the different WhatsApp groups throughout the club. Then you can all listen back to it.
If you just put an email on as well, Graham, so if anyone's got any questions,
okay.
I'll get back to you as quick as I can. But if you've forgot something from today or throughout the season, if anyone's got any questions, I'll be more than happy to help.
Definitely. And you'll have to come down and watch one of the games and have a curry and a pint.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right, guys.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thanks, man. Bye-bye.
Cheers, John.